We are going way back old school. I don't think we've done a hangout like this since probably February, Steve.
It's been a while. It's definitely been a while. This is like going definitely old school.
Definitely. So this morning at about 8 o'clock, I was awoken by a loud crashing noise, and right outside my house, a drunk driver had decided to take out a telephone pole. Guy walked out of the car fine. I mean, like it was nothing, but the telephone pole was definitely damaged. So I'm without power at my place until 9 tonight, and that explains the tech issues that we had just a few minutes ago. We apologize for that, but nonetheless, we are back, and we're just going to go retro style with an old Google Hangouts. But let's say hello to the two guys that you guys probably came here to see anyway, and that would be Adam Kokesh and Carl Benjamin. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome back, actually.
Yes, thank you. By the way, that's like the best excuse you could possibly have for this. I mean, just way better than the dog ate your homework. Yeah, the drunk driver telephone pole.
It wasn't I didn't think about the ramifications until about noon, where I was like, oh wait, everything that I have literally for the show runs on power, and so I'm gonna have to have a backup plan. But yes, welcome back, and Carl, thanks for coming back to you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I asked you a little bit before, but I'm just curious. How do you think tomorrow's going to go?
I honestly don't know. I genuinely have no idea. I just published a video about it, just saying, well, I mean, the polls are 87% in favor of the Democrats, but then they were 97% in favor of Hillary. So,
yeah, that's true.
And the Democrats themselves aren't trusting the polls either, and I don't blame them. I get the feeling that there are probably it was probably the same with Brexit over in this country, where you had a large number of people who would effectively just lie to the pollsters, because in public they'd be browbeaten by screeching leftists, and so they'd just keep their opinions to themselves and then go and vote. And and now we're leaving the European Union. So I honestly don't know. I honestly couldn't say.
Yeah. And what about you, Adam?
Well, after hours and hours and hours of analysis, fortunately done by other people, I have come to the conclusion that a party that doesn't care about your freedom is going to win, and we have a lot of work to do.
Awesome. Well, that's I guess that's a good segue into what we're going to be discussing today. Why don't you, Adam, kind of give us an overview of what you feel the government should be, or how it should be run, and kind of your philosophy, and we'll let Carl kind of come in off of that.
Are you sure that's how you want to spend the first half hour of this?
Takes a couple hours.
That's actually accurate. I think that Steve and I usually say some words in this show, and when we had just you on by yourself, I think me and Steve got like 5 words total.
Was I even in that one? It was like all Adam's show, which was great actually. We didn't have to do much work. It was just let him talk.
But yeah, that's
what you
that's
can
why
do.
I say a
lot.
Summary. Give us a brief summary of what you think the correct form of government should be.
Sure. Well, this kind of comes down to a matter of definitions. And as we know it, government today is a coercive monopoly based on a specific geographical territory. And if we look at ethics and what ethics dictates how we relate to other human beings, don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, those basic moral rules are in the best interest of humanity prospering and relating to each other in a way that's good for everybody. And you don't get to make exceptions to those rules for government. It's not don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, unless you're a cop or an IRS agent or a soldier. And so that points us to this ideal of a voluntary society. I describe myself first and foremost as a voluntarist. I like the term libertarian. I think it's more general and inclusive, but specifically philosophically, the understanding that all human relationships should be voluntary if you care about human happiness and health and prosperity. And so that ideal might not be something that you can say we're ever going to achieve, in the sense that if you had a perfectly voluntary society, the minute someone gets punched in the face by a drunk guy, for that moment for him, it's not voluntary. But what we have today is a society that is dominated by coercive institutions, and governments have cut up the world into territories that cover the globe. So the question becomes, how do we get away from this? How do we transition away from this in a manner that's peaceful and orderly and responsible, and transition to a voluntary society? Now, a lot of people, a lot of conservatives and libertarians, and it's a very important distinction. I don't think libertarianism is a right philosophy or a left philosophy, because right and left really describe different flavors of statism, different things that people would like to use violence and coercion in the form of the institution of government to carry on in society. So when, but libertarians and conservatives, when we look at, the evil of big government, we often confuse the evil with the size. And I often like to challenge libertarians by pointing out that government is not necessarily more evil because it is larger. And the thought exercise I propose very simply is, would you rather have a government that's very large, like half the population, but it more or less approximates what the market would provide and really uses just enough coercion to maintain its monopolies and respect civil liberties and is generally nonviolent, or a government that's tiny, that's 1% of the population, but say murders every firstborn child? Obviously, you'd rather live in a big government that's nonviolent than a small government that's extremely violent. And so the measure of the evil of government, and really the economic impact, is how much it takes us off the state of natural harmony that a free market would provide. So anyway, how we get to that point, what I see as the most likely, the most effective, the most efficient transition is localization of government. And eventually we're going to make sure that it's completely obsolete. Technology is doing that essentially for us anyway. The idea that we would need to rely on these kinds of institutions that are based on coercion, problems that exist for lack of information, all of those are basically going away with the increase in technology that is exponential: supercomputing, artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, life extension technology. All of these things are combining to make it possible for humanity to achieve, if not the absolute perfect ideal, the general ideal of a voluntary society that holds those standards of ethics in appropriate regard.
Okay. And Carl, what's wrong with that?
It's never going to happen.
And why not?
Because we don't have a monopoly on the government of the world. The problem that you have with any kind of, we are discussing anarchism here specifically, and not libertarianism, aren't we? Because in my opinion, the problem with anarchism is that it always loses to any kind of statism because of the effectiveness of the state to marshal a force.
Do you mind if I stop and define terms here, since you applied the label to me, in anarchy?
Well, I'm asking. I mean, if you don't,
Sure.
if you don't consider yourself an anarchist, that's fine.
Well, it becomes a matter of definitions. Like I said, voluntary is first. So I would not object to someone having an institution called government. You have the right to call it whatever you want, as long as it's not coercive, as long as it is ethical in its primacy. So you could say that if you say government is inherently the definition that I gave it as a fixed definition, that government is by definition always inherently coercive, then what I'm saying is anarchism. You can say that. Or if government can become voluntary, what I'm advocating for is a society that only has governments which are voluntary.
Okay, so government can't be voluntary. It has to be a unique legal entity with a monopoly on force, a monopoly on law giving, probably others, to be honest, but they're the two that I think are the most important. And it has to be over a discrete geographical area. That could be the entire Earth if we had a world state. Not that I think that's a good idea, but it's probably inevitable at some point. And I don't think there's any way of getting around that. I mean, I don't really see how you can expect people to live in perfect harmony with one another without the need for laws. And if you do need laws, then who enforces them?
Well, already, this is based on what I see as the historical trend and the immediate relevance of government. I mean, to answer your question in two parts, there's the historical part, and I like to cite the work of Professor Steven Pinker, who's not a libertarian by any stretch, a Harvard professor who has proven academically that we're living in the least violent times, the most peaceful times in human history, that we are less likely today than ever before to die at the hands of another human being. And when you understand freedom is nonviolence, right? I mean, if we live in a nonviolent society, that's one where freedom is respected, obviously. And that trend of violence is like a radioactive decay curve. We are actually getting more capable, more harmonious, more prosperous over time. That's the nature of intelligent life progressing. So I see all of the great forces of nature, all of the great forces of history really moving us in this direction.
Can I interject here? Do you mind if I just interject there? Yeah, sorry. The thing that you're describing is true. Obviously, and it's true about the West, especially. But I mean, it probably is true of non-Western countries that violence is declining. But the thing is, this is all a consequence of the liberal state. This is because the state exists and operates in a certain way, that it's accountable to its citizenry, that it protects private property rights, that it protects human life, using laws from lawmakers who are accountable that allow this to happen. And the second that the government breaks down, you end up like Somalia with ridiculous murder rates, with no protection of private property. So I don't see how we can abandon the mechanism by which we have created this world.
So that's one of Steven Pinker's theories as well. And I want to go back to the point you made before, that humans need laws if they're going to live in harmony, if we're going to have standards, and I would say that the one law that's relevant, that really is the universal standard, is the natural law based on self-ownership. And that is that you, as an independent entity, as a sovereign consciousness, you own yourself, and it's unethical. It's wrong for anybody else to claim ownership over you. And from the Lockean concept of property rights, this is how you mix your labor with natural resources and acquire property legitimately through voluntary trade. And when I say that this is partly grounded in my observation of current reality with the relevance of government, a lot of people will say, well, we need government in order for people to have laws enforced and for people to be good. But the greater force here is not that. It's really the market forces that are prevalent to those human relationships and the accountability mechanisms that we already have for bad actors. So for someone to say, well, we need laws, as in we need a government, we need an enforcer that is this arbitrary giver of a legal standard, it's like saying, well, if it wasn't for government, I'd just go on a killing spree. But when you separate what is actually happening from the institution that is claiming credit for it, and I grant you the point that a lot of human progress towards a more harmonious society is because of mechanisms of government and accountability. But if anything, they've been holding us back from better applying those technologies, from better applying our ability to hold each other accountable. So I don't think if we got rid of government, everybody would go on a murder spree. But what we would develop very soon is we'd be able to separate the false services from government that are based on the coercion and the imposition of the monopoly and the control and the exploitation and the corruption, and get down to the real legitimate justice services. Do we need a law written down? No, we need protection and accountability for people who are bad actors. The services to provide that will always be better provided by the market. And this is the one thing that I think a lot of statists, but conservatives especially, can't really get around, is separating these ideas. They'll say we can do everything else with the free market, but if it has to do with force and violence or protection or dispute resolution, that has to be done by government. And that's the worst. That leads to the worst corruption, the worst destruction of life and property, and essentially, of course, war and things like the war on drugs and all the greater evils of government.
Okay, so how exactly would a non-governmental legal system work?
Well, there are a lot of different theories about how we would do this, but there are a lot of viable ones that look like insurance companies and dispute resolution organizations and private security that could either be community-based or completely market-based and individual-based. So,
okay, well, stop there then. Why would I cooperate with any of these?
Because if you don't, then you'll lose your reputation and you'll be ostracized from society, essentially. And if you're actually, in a sense,
hang on. But what if that doesn't matter?